Join us on an investigative journey.
We'll educate each other on a range of scientific concepts, discoveries, and phenomena.
As well as a dive into the complex world of pseudoscience to separate the factual from the fabricated.
I'm Matt McCabe.
I'm Levi Bateman.
And I'm Sam Losarico.
And this is Idio Facto.
For the listeners, we got absolutely grilled earlier on for having subpar audio quality. Our editor issued a bit of feedback.
And look, the editor knows what he's doing. And it just so happens to be me. So, for reference, it sounds like Levi is like right up in his microphone like this, and there's a lot of it moving around and stuff. And then Sam can't help himself but go like this every 10 seconds. So that's kind of hard to deal with.
Yeah, it's called a habit. Sorry. Jesus.
Anyway, you're welcome. I make you sound better. So.
No, but
Yeah, well,
but Sam, you do a lot.
I can't help it.
That's fair.
fine.
It's just getting roasted.
Roasted like your coffee.
Let's not talk about
Oh,
it again.
my coffee's so good.
I shouldn't have mentioned it.
Actually, we did receive a bit of feedback.
Did
from,
we?
Yeah, from a listener. Our friend from Gippsland, Julia Martin, Jules, she wrote to the Idio Facto page, I believe it was Saturday night, and she said, can you guys please do an episode on coffee? I'd love to know
Yes.
about the science behind coffee. And
I would love to.
yeah, and I said, well, I'll leave it to Sam, but
Yeah. No worries.
We'll both get in massive trouble if we don't leave it to Sam.
I'll be
and
furious.
we won't be in the episode at the time. It'll just be Sam. On
Just
his
be
own.
me. Just talking real excitedly about coffee.
No,
Idio Coffee, it's coming.
I'm actually super interested in the actual science of coffee. Same as the science of everything, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it was presented to me in a scientific way, I'd probably be more interested in it than I was last week.
Oh, yeah,
I
I'm
just
sure.
like to make fun of Sam, so
Oh, I hadn't noticed.
You guys,
really.
You're not going to believe what I'm looking at right now. Sorry to change the subject from coffee. I have a mated pair of blue acaras. They're a type of cichlid, which is a type of fish, if you want to use that dastardly word. But
What's a
a
fish?
No
male
such thing as a fish.
Exactly. No, that's why. Yeah, they're blue acaras, cichlidae. But they're laying, as we speak, they're laying eggs and fertilizing them on a rock in my aquarium. And
That is pretty cool.
I think
cool.
it's because I did a huge water change yesterday, and the water is slightly cooler than the water that's in their aquarium already because it's rainwater, and their aquarium is heated because they're tropical fish. But I think what happens is that when I do a big water change, it simulates like a big rainfall event, which in the wild would trigger mating. So these guys think that it's just rained, or like there's a new season, which they think, oh, cool, the ponds are filling up. Our young will be happy, and they're laying eggs.
You tricked him.
That is amazing.
It is amazing. It'll be interesting to see because I've got another mated pair in my aquarium as well, so a pair of convict cichlids, and they lay a lot of eggs as well. So it'll be interesting to see,
Wow.
yeah, if they do it as well.
That's really cool.
Well, we've gone from your hobby of keeping fish, Levi,
Matt, tell us about your hobby.
and I've actually taken your advice and taken up keeping plants, gardening.
Oh,
Good boy. I'm proud of you.
Well, I had already before you suggested it, but I've now bought another 2 plants, and I got one as a gift from my girlfriend the other day. So
Nice.
now I'm positively surrounded in greenery.
Anything edible yet?
Nothing edible yet, no.
Everything's edible if you Bear Grylls enough.
Yeah, that's true. However, that is how a lot of people died. I really appreciate all the sacrifices to the human race that people were like, oh, that looks edible, and someone else went, oh, I don't know, and they went, nah, we'll give it a go.
Who looks at a strawberry and goes, oh yeah, that looks like it won't kill me?
Yeah.
Well, if I saw it
That's terrifying.
if I saw it in the wild, I'd probably steer clear of it.
Yeah.
Like things
Yeah,
that
right,
are bright
that's what I
red
mean.
usually a warning sign of poison.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then all the seeds in the surface. Like, have you seen the pictures of where the seeds in the surface start sprouting like little green bits as well? It looks, yeah. I'll see if I can find a picture and I'll put it in the show notes. But
I wonder if that, like a close-up image of a strawberry, would stim out friend of the podcast, Tom Golovic, claims to have a phobia. Sam, you probably know the name of it, but I'm going to Google it right now.
Would I?
is it trypophobia, fear of holes?
Yes! Trypophobia.
Ah.
So it's the fear of, like, you know, like the typical image that sets these guys off is like a lotus flower like seed pod, like a surface with a heap of holes in it with tiny little seeds in them. Like, Google trypophobia and you'll see these images that we mean.
No, I don't have trypophobia, but it is weird.
It is a bit weird, especially when somebody photoshops like a lotus seed pod onto someone's skin, like the sole of their foot or something. But anyway, I might show Tom a close-up photo of a strawberry.
I uploaded a picture that's a strawberry sprouting leaves from it.
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
Oh, that's terrible. Well, maybe I do have trypophobia, but there's something that I've actually been diagnosed with, and that's astigmatism. And to do that, to treat astigmatism, the easiest way is to wear glasses.
Right. What's astigmatism?
It's just a condition where the lenses in your eye, they don't focus light evenly onto the retina. So it just means things are a bit blurry and lights can spread out a little bit more. It's not bad, and like 30 to 60% of the population have it.
Well, it's bad for your vision, clearly.
Yeah, well, I really wear glasses only when I'm looking at a computer or driving at night or something like that, just because the light spreads out a lot more.
Oh, okay.
So these are actual prescribed glasses that I wear, but you can actually buy different kinds of glasses, and those different kinds of glasses are blue light filtering glasses. Have you heard of these ones?
I'm so glad you're talking about this.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it, to be honest, except that my skeptical ears prick up when I hear people talking about blue light and this blue light setting in your phone and night mode and that kind of thing, and filters that you can put over your TV and your computer screen.
So, I mean, there is evidence to say that blue light can disrupt your circadian rhythms, which is the rhythms in your brain that tell you when to sleep and when to be awake and things like that. So there's definitely evidence that says your circadian rhythms can be disrupted by blue light, and you should limit your exposure to blue light at nighttime so that your body starts to wind down and your brain tells your body that it's getting time to go to bed.
Isn't that true of all light, though?
No, not necessarily.
It's particularly bad with blue light. So, like, red light is not as bad. And that's why there are night settings on your phones and your computers and things like that, is to filter out as much blue light as possible and just use other wavelengths of the visible spectrum.
Really? So this is true?
It is true that it disrupts your circadian rhythms, yes.
To a noticeable level?
Yeah.
Yes, to a noticeable level, but the extent of which is somewhat controversial.
Because I would have thought, I mean, if I'm laying in bed at night time, and I've been laying in bed for half an hour, scrolling through Instagram or Reddit or whatever on my phone, I would have thought that whether or not there's blue light coming to me, that is probably more of an issue than just my head hitting the pillow.
It's hard to study something like that for those reasons. Because your brain is working as well. It's not just the light that's doing it. It's also the fact that your brain is active. But there is evidence to say that the blue light can inhibit melatonin, which is the hormone that tells your brain to go to sleep, basically.
Right.
So that's definitely a thing. However, recently, some retailers have been advertising the fact that blue light is harmful in a lot of other ways, that it causes eye strain and that it's not good for your eyes in general. It causes you to, eventually have eye problems, like vision problems.
Yeah, this is what I've been seeing more and more of, way more of lately. Rather than just that it helps you to sleep if you don't have blue light, the blue light is actually almost damaging.
Yeah, and it's the same with so many like pseudosciences or even just new kind of health claims. It's you take one specific thing and then it's quickly extrapolated to be applicable to everything.
That's right. So there's no published evidence to demonstrate that exposure to blue light in any way damages eyesight at all. You can get eye strain from staring at electronics, and there are exercises that recommend that you look away from the screen for 20 seconds every 20 minutes for that purpose to stop eye strain. But that's more from like your eyes being focused on one spot for so long. It's less about the actual wavelength of the light that's hitting your eyes. So if you got these blue light filtering glasses and wore them during the day, they would be pointless, because what that means is when a light shines out, say a white light shines out from your computer screen, you're looking at a white computer screen, say, you have all of the wavelengths of visible light coming out to your eyes at that point, right? So there's nothing particular about the blue light that makes your eyes strain any more or less than any other wavelength.
Right.
So filtering out that blue light is pointless because there's another source of blue light, and blue light just means anything that is the color blue is reflecting blue light, right?
Right, yeah.
Can you think of another source of blue light in the world?
Yep. The sky.
The sky. There is way, way, way more blue light that comes from the sky when you look at a blue sky than there is coming from your computer screen. So in order for blue light to induce damage to your eyesight, that would mean that everyone's eyesight would always be being damaged during the day when there's a blue sky.
Yeah.
Which just doesn't make any sense.
No.
So the only benefit that you'd get from wearing blue light filtering glasses is to not disrupt your circadian rhythms.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong and you've found something different, but my understanding, because I've looked at it for myself in the past, was that while exposure to blue light has been linked with disruption of circadian rhythms, a lot of the any studies on the actual devices, like either the blue light filters or the blue light glasses, show they actually don't make any difference to sleep. So the blue light is definitely linked with this with the disruption to the circadian rhythm, but the devices that we have so far don't really work.
Oh, right. So they actually don't block enough or any blue light, really.
Yeah, well, that's my understanding. I could be wrong, though. But did you find anything else? Did you find any devices that do work?
No, well, there's the report from the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Ophthalmologists, which is what I read. It says that there's no evidence behind claims that blue light from electronics is harmful or that blue light filtering eyeglasses are necessary or beneficial.
Right.
So it's more about the glasses than it is about the
actual blue light,
the screens.
Yeah.
But there is maybe some benefit to limiting exposure to blue light in the evening. But honestly, it's much better probably to just avoid screens altogether.
Yeah, that's part of what's called sleep hygiene. Yeah. You guys aware of sleep hygiene?
Yeah, I've heard of this before.
Yeah. Essentially, there's a few things you can do to improve your sleep. And a big one is avoiding screens for... The recommendation is an hour, but at least half an hour before sleep.
Yeah, right. See, I do the exact opposite of that. I literally have a TV on in the bedroom and watch an episode of TV and usually fall asleep whilst I'm watching it. So
I've got a device. This maybe should be a topic for another episode, but I've got a device called the Whoop strap, and it's a wearable. It's an activity tracker kind of, but it's.
Does Whoop stand for something?
I don't know actually. I never looked
wearable
into that.
something.
It might. I actually never looked into what it... But it's...
It's a wellness hoop.
There you go. Did you look it up?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I
I have no idea. I have no idea what it stands for.
I just made it up.
Sounds
Is it
right.
like a wearable from Goop?
It is not.
Is
It
it
not?
is the opposite of a wearable from Goop.
Sorry,
It
Sam.
is actually very well scientifically backed. It's an externally validated sleep tracker. So it's
Cool.
been shown in studies that it's as good as like the gold standard of sleep trackers,
Wow.
which is pretty amazing. And it also
Wait, so it's like the equivalent of a sleep study, like an actual sleep study?
apparently it's as accurate or close enough to as accurate in tracking REM and slow wave sleep, which is really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's first was marketed as just as a fitness tracker, and then they realized that they could do a lot more with it. And anyway, on there, it tracks your sleep and it lets you know what percentage was REM, what percentage was slow wave. And it also has like a diary section where it gives you a heap of things that you tick off each day, like I viewed a screen in bed or I didn't, or how long before bed did I eat, did I read before bed, all that kind of stuff. And then after it's got enough data, then it shows you what affects your sleep. And mine so far has shown that if I'm looking at a device for, I think it's up to 15 minutes before I go to bed, then my sleep's worse. I get less REM sleep, which is pretty interesting.
Wow.
That is very interesting.
But it's a sleep tracker as well as like a regular activity tracker. It measures recovery rate, primarily based on heart rate variability, which is a very interesting metric. And it also measures strain levels throughout the day. So yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, just while we're on sleep, I listened to an episode of Ologies with Ali Ward on somnology, which is the study of sleep. And the guy on there spoke about this paradoxical insomnia. It used to be called sleep state misperception. And basically, it's complaints of little to no sleep or insomnia style complaints over a long period of time. But then when you actually get placed under a sleep tracker or a sleep study and you still make these complaints of, no sleep or little sleep, the sleep study comes back that you actually got plenty of sleep, enough sleep. You imagined not sleeping. Yeah. Which is wild.
There was an episode of House on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The patient in that was having like micro sleeps every minute or so. Was just sleeping for like a few seconds.
Right. I just imagine that's what like every hospital's like. Like Dr. House's.
Yeah. It's identical.
Yeah. Every case would be that cryptic.
And I'm House.
Basically, I was going to say, Sam is at Gregory House.
I wish. That'd be cool. Minus the pill addiction and the leg. But, just the brilliance.
Douchebaggery.
Nah, the douchebaggery is fine.
You can be that much of a douchebag if you're also as brilliant as what he is.
Exactly.
I think that's about the only part of his personality that you've got down to a fine art, Sam.
The brilliance. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Wowzers.
Or just the arrogance, possibly. But that's okay.
Shots fired.
Brutal.
Anyway, don't buy a pair of blue light glasses if you think it's going to stop you from getting eye strain, because it's not going to help.
But it may help with sleep, possibly.
Well, yeah, no, it's not going to help with eye strain, is what I said.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of think about sleep that it's one of those things, right, that maybe, yes, I'm sure that if in a perfectly controlled environment, if there was maybe less blue light, then maybe your circadian rhythm wouldn't get interrupted as much. But I feel like it's one of those things that's so complicated, and there's so much that you do throughout the day that all could influence your sleep. And there's probably this sleep hygiene that you're talking about, Sam. And I'm sure one of those factors would be screen time, or maybe potentially even they might go down to the level of blue light. But what about as much as your bed or your pillow or the temperature of the room or what you ate or drank that day or who's in the bed with you?
I think it's a bit like diets as well. Like, all of these things kind of make a small difference, but it's the sum of all the effects that make the big difference. You know what I mean? Like, it's you can do, if you do 95% of the things correctly, then that's probably almost as good as if you do 100% of the things correctly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, there's probably not one big thing you're getting to change that's apart from going to sleep earlier or getting up later. There's probably not something that's going to make a huge change, but there's lots of little incremental changes you can make for sure.
True.
Yeah.
I'm very lucky that I've always been a pretty good sleeper. Like, I can just about sleep anywhere, and I fall asleep very, very quickly.
You might be surprised, though, how poor quality a lot of that sleep is. You know what? A massive one is alcohol affects your sleep so much. You might feel like having a drink gets you to sleep better or whatever, but the quality of your sleep after alcohol is so much worse. It's crazy. It's really interesting.
Oh, big time.
So, I think we mentioned this after I talked about keto, that diabetes would be an interesting topic to talk about.
Very.
And it's something that obviously is very, very common, which I'll get into. And, you know, I work on a rehab ward, so most of my patients are probably 70 plus years old, and a huge percentage of them have diabetes. So it's something we come across all the time. So let's have a little trip down etymology lane to start off with, which I'd actually never looked up before, but I found very interesting.
Yeah, neither have I.
Yeah. So diabetes is a Greek word meaning siphon.
Whoa.
And that means
Siphon.
and that means the excessive discharge of urine. So
Really?
yeah, so already that has probably changed your perception of what diabetes is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that it'll make more sense in a minute. Why that's what the term is.
Is that linked in any way to the word diuretic, which also means a very similar thing?
Similar root. So, diuretic is Greek dia and Greek uron, which means urine, and dia means through. And then that went to diurine, and then it went to diuretikos, and then that got changed to, in Old French, diuretic, spelt diuretique, and now it's diuretic, which is spelt with tic at the end.
I love anything that ends in a C sound that's spelt with QUE. Excellent.
Diabetic.
Diabetic.
If you have diabetes and you want to seem fancy, you can call yourself a diabetic.
Diabetic.
I actually spell the word thick. THIQUE. Just for funsies, you know.
Yeah. Nice.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, I got one sentence
Very
into that.
silly.
We're already off topic. So, yes.
Half an hour into the episode, we haven't even...
I haven't done anything yet. All right, so let's crack on. Diabetes is a Greek word meaning siphon. And the correct term for... So do you know the common types of diabetes? And there's more than two?
I didn't know that. Nah, I knew diabetes type 1 and 2. And
Yes.
I know that one of them you're born with and the other one you acquire throughout your life. But I don't know which one is which.
There,
That's a pretty good
type
summary.
3 gestational diabetes?
Yeah, so it's not really type 3, but you are right. There is a type called gestational diabetes. But diabetes type 1 and 2 are actually diabetes mellitus. And mellitus is a Latin word meaning sweet. So together they mean to siphon sugar or to urinate excessively and with sugar in the urine.
There's another one that commits the cardinal sin of putting a Greek word next to a Latin word.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yes. And the word for sugar in the urine is glucosuria.
Okay.
Which makes sense.
Kind of painting a bit of a picture of what's happening.
Yeah. And then the other main type of diabetes, well, there is gestational diabetes, which is basically like a transient form of diabetes that women can get in pregnancy, but then it does lead to an increased risk of type 2 diabetes later as well.
Really?
But the other type of diabetes, which is not called mellitus, is diabetes insipidus.
Wow.
And this is a condition, and I didn't look up what insipidus means, but anyway.
Well, insipid is like lame, isn't it? Like unable to move.
Come on, you've got to look it up now.
Yeah, I got to look it up.
You told us what the others were.
Oh, that's right. I did look it up. I just forgot to write it down. Insipidus means tasteless. So basically, dilute urine.
Oh.
Right.
So diabetes insipidus, I won't go into any of that today, but essentially it's a condition characterized by excreting large amounts of urine and increased thirst, and it's due to an imbalance in hormones.
Right.
And urine production can be up to nearly 20 litres a day in extreme cases.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah. There's 4 different types. They'll have different causes, all
How
issues
do
due to
you-
hormones.
So you would have to be ingesting 20 litres worth of liquid.
Yeah, otherwise you'll be very dehydrated.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I've actually seen one patient who was having an acute episode of it, and it was pretty amazing. The amount of urine it was
Wow.
putting out.
I'd be lucky if I drink 1 litre of liquid in a day.
Wow, you should definitely drink more than that. That's actually another topic that I want to discuss one day, is the 8 glasses of water thing. But anyway, we'll go into that another day. So let's talk about diabetes mellitus. So there's type 1 and type 2. As you said, Levi, there's one that's kind of inherited, and then there's one that's developed later in life. Type 1 is the inherited type. Before I go into the different types of them, though, I'll give you a brief overview of glucose homeostasis in the body, just so you kind of understand how they affect that in the body. So, do you know what homeostasis is?
Yeah, staying the same.
Yeah. And it's basically how most of the systems in our body work, is to try and keep things the same.
Yeah.
That's what that Bee Gees song is about.
Yes.
Staying the same. Staying the same. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
No, different. Paul.
That's.
Oh, okay.
That was
I think that's probably the worst one so far in 33 episodes of Idio Facto.
Huge
Oh,
call.
I don't know about that.
That's a huge call.
In fact, could somebody go back and review all
Please write
episodes?
in and tell us Levi's worst joke.
It's got to be a worse joke than that.
That's pretty bad.
Anyway,
Sorry.
keep going.
So-
Cut that part
Sorry.
out.
Okay, so yeah. No, he won't. He'll put that in the blue.
I know.
Yeah, I'll put that
Cheeky
in. Don't worry.
We repeat it too.
So yes, glucose is the primary fuel source for the cells. It's what we synthesize our energy from. So because of this, we need a tightly regulated amount of glucose in the blood. If it's too low, then the cells won't be getting enough energy to function. And then if it's too high, then the excess will be excreted in the urine, which is inefficient for the body because you need to take in more and metabolize more foods. So excess glucose is stored throughout the body. It's either stored as glycogen or fats. When there is an increased blood glucose level, so after like a carb-rich meal, the beta cells in the pancreas are stimulated to release insulin into the blood. So insulin causes the body cells to take up more glucose. It just does that by there's a particular receptor on the cells that it stimulates to take in more glucose from the blood.
That's insulin's primary function?
Yes, and it also stimulates. Well, it's got a few, but that's the main one systemically. The other thing it does is it stimulates the liver to take up glucose and store it as glycogen. And most of your glycogen stores are in the liver and in the skeletal muscle because they're the places that are going to use it the most. They need the quick access to it to use it.
Okay.
And then as blood glucose level declines, then the insulin secretion declines with it. So that's basically what happens after you eat, a bunch of glucose. When there's low blood glucose, so if you've skipped a meal or if you've removed the excess, etc., the alpha cells of the pancreas release glucagon into the blood, which causes liver to break down glycogen and release it into the bloodstream. So as you can see, insulin and the pancreas both play pretty big roles in the regulation of blood glucose levels. The presence of insulin also stimulates the storage of glucose into fats. Does that make sense so far?
Yep.
So far.
That's good. Yeah, good summary. I didn't really know how that whole cycle worked, but no, that's good.
All right, so now to diabetes. So diabetes mellitus is actually classified into 4 different categories: type 1, type 2, gestational, and then there's other very specific types, which I won't go into. Also won't really go over gestational today. Basically because it's very similar to type 2, and then it increases your risk
Just
of type 2
because it's
later.
transient.
Yeah.
Right.
It can lead to basically just developing diabetes ongoing afterwards. But usually it resolves after pregnancy. So type 1 diabetes mellitus is actually an autoimmune condition where the body mistakenly attacks the beta cells in the pancreas. So obviously the beta cells in the pancreas are what release insulin. So if you're attacking those cells, then you will not be able to release insulin into the blood in response to the blood glucose changes.
Right.
The cause of it isn't really known. We do know there's a strong familial link.
Oh, right. So if it's hereditary. If your
Yes.
parents have got it, it's likely that the kids will get it.
Yeah.
It's more likely.
It's not always hereditary, but it's certainly, there is a strong hereditary link to it. There's no cure. It can't be prevented. And it represents about 10% of all cases of diabetes. It's actually...
so it's fairly rare then
in comparison to type 2, in the grand scheme of diabetes, it's fairly rare. It is, however, one of the most common chronic childhood conditions.
Right.
Yeah, and it's usually onset under the age of 30, usually in the late teens. So the exact cause isn't known, and the onset. Well, actually, I'll clarify that the clinical onset is usually quite sudden, with symptoms of excessive thirst and urination, unexplained weight loss, weakness and fatigue, blurred vision, and the mainstay of treatment is insulin supplementation.
Right.
Which is via injections several times a day or through an insulin pump.
Right.
Is that becoming more popular, the insulin pump?
They've actually been around for quite a while. It's the biggest issue with them is funding, because they're very expensive.
Oh,
So
okay.
I have not, I think I've maybe only really had 2 or 3 type 1 diabetics as patients that I can remember. And I don't think any of them are on pumps.
Right.
But from my understanding, to get them on a subsidised pump that they don't have to pay for privately, you have to prove that their diabetes is very, very difficult to control just with regular injections.
Okay.
And usually with regular injections and a good strict dietary regime, it can be fairly well controlled, but that's not always the case. And then obviously they're limited because they're so expensive. They're limited for the most difficult cases.
What's the price of insulin? Just the injections, like
5 pens of insulin, which really variable how long that would last, depending on how many units, because the pens are preloaded with 100 units.
Right.
5 pens cost $40,
right.
which is fairly expensive. That could last maybe for most patients, that's probably a few weeks worth.
I was just thinking I would hate to be on a medication that's very expensive that I can't live without, and then I know that I'm an asthmatic, and I do have a medication that I take twice daily so that I don't die of an asthma attack. So. And that's quite expensive. That's about $50, $45, something like that.
Yeah.
And it lasts me like a month and a bit.
Yeah. That
sucks.
Yeah. But most diabetics are on more than just the insulin as well.
Right. Okay.
Which I'll get into later on as well.
Mm-hmm.
With type 1 diabetes, the main consequence is something called ketoacidosis. Diabetic ketoacidosis essentially presents with anorexia, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, dehydration. Really severe cases cause hyperventilation, severe dehydration, drowsiness, lethargy, and occasionally can lead to death. It's from the severity of acidosis in the blood. It's basically where there's high levels of glucose but no insulin. So no insulin means glucose can't be taken into the cells. So the cells are in starvation mode, which causes a breakdown of fats and proteins, causes a release of ketone bodies into the blood, and then the ketones cause acidosis of the blood. And then the high glucose also gets excreted through the urine, which pulls more water into the urine through osmosis, so you get very dehydrated, causes severe electrolyte disturbances. So as I'm sure you're aware, our blood pH level has to be very tightly controlled. So any deviation from that can cause you to become quite unwell quite quickly. And ketoacidosis, it causes a pretty significant shift in the pH of the blood. And
is that because pH can denature proteins in the same way that heat can denature proteins?
Yeah. And there are proteins in our blood that are in our cells that are very sensitive to pH. So a lot of them, they'll continue to work, but they won't be as effective if the pH is changed.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically the consequence we're trying to avoid with type 1 diabetes, along with a bunch of others, which I'll get into after I discuss type 2 as well. So type 2 is the progressive condition where the body becomes resistant to the normal effects of insulin, or where the pancreas becomes gradually unable to produce enough insulin for the body, or a combination of both. The beta cells die from overproduction of insulin, and then hence cause an increased deficit in insulin. So type 2 diabetes is associated with modifiable lifestyle risk factors. There is a genetic predisposition where people are more likely to develop it. However, the lifestyle factors still play a very significant role in the development and also the severity of the disease. So the risk factors are obesity, because it reduces the beta cell sensitivity to glucose. And interestingly, the effects of obesity can be largely reversed by weight loss. So in the early stages, type 2 diabetes could be reversible or even, in air quotes, curable. The other risk factors are lack of physical activity, a poor diet, stress, urbanization, high blood pressure. Yeah, that's been shown to be a risk factor.
As in, like, if you live in a city, you're more likely to develop diabetes than if you live rurally.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
Age is another one, and then particular populations. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have very high levels of diabetes compared to the Caucasian population, Pacific Island, and also Indian or Chinese background are associated with a higher risk of type 2 diabetes.
So yeah, that would suggest that it's a genetic factor there.
Yeah. And then other factors that contribute to the development are free fatty acids, which are higher in obese patients, so it could just be part of that whole obesity picture. So quick little epidemiology trip. There's the most recent statistics from July 2018 for Australia. There are 1.7 million Australians that have diabetes.
Whoa.
Yeah. 1.2 million known and diagnosed, and estimated 500,000 undiagnosed type 2 diabetics, which is still a huge amount.
Yeah.
280 Australians develop diabetes every day. One person every 5 minutes.
Whoa.
This is a combined type 1 and 2?
Yes, all types.
Right. Oh, yeah, of course.
And also a statistic I find very interesting. Total annual cost impact of diabetes in Australia, $14.6 billion.
Whoa. Far out.
So that's
Is
a
that
lot of money.
the cost to the government or the cost to people?
To the government.
Wow.
To the healthcare system, yeah.
Right, so that's not taken into account the cost of insulin that people are paying out of their own pockets.
Or it would be, because insulin's subsidised by the government.
Subsidised, yeah, right.
Yeah, but it wouldn't include the bit that the patients pay as well. Yeah, and then some global statistics from last year. There's 463 million people globally that have diabetes. About 10% of global health expenditure is spent on diabetes, which is US dollars 760 billion a year. And 1.1 million people below the age of 20 have type 1 diabetes.
Wow. Worldwide?
Worldwide, yeah.
Okay.
So how do we diagnose it? There's a blood marker blood tests. So there's a few different ones. Obviously all focused on glucose levels. There's a blood marker called HbA1c, which basically measures the average blood glucose level over a period of approximately 3 months. And if it's above a certain number, then that's a diagnostic for diabetes, and the number arbitrarily is 6.5. Well, not arbitrarily, but for the purposes of this, it's 6.5%, which probably won't mean anything to you, is what I meant to say. Yeah.
But there must be a quicker way of diagnosing it, isn't there? Because I mean, when I was younger, I had a glucose tolerance test.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that was the test for diabetes.
Yeah, and
but so this marker, if it's above 6.5%, that means it's been high for 3 months.
Yeah, on average, it's been above the normal range for over that 3 months, and that's just a single blood test. That's a once off.
So basically, if you can detect this in your blood, it means that your average glucose levels have been high over the last 3 months.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right.
glucose can bond with hemoglobin, and then because the half-life of hemoglobin is about 3 months, then we can test that level over that amount of time.
Right.
Basically, is how it works. The other test, as you said, Levi, the glucose tolerance test. So we take a fasting level, and then we give you about 75 grams of oral glucose in a disgusting tasting drink, and then we recheck the glucose level 2 hours after. And if your glucose level is above a particular number, which is 11.1, then that's diagnostic for diabetes as well.
Mhm.
And then the other thing we can do is just a fasting blood glucose level after an at least 8-hour fast. And if your blood glucose level is more than 7 after an 8-hour fast, then that's diagnostic for diabetes.
Cool.
So, high glucose levels. Why are we concerned about them?
Because it means that the insulin is not doing its job.
But what does it lead to?
Ketoacidosis or whatever it is.
It can in acute severe cases. The things we're more concerned about with type 2 diabetes are the
Hypoglycemia. Hyperglycemia.
Yeah, so hypoglycemia is low glucose.
Low blood sugar.
And that can be symptomatic as well. That's usually from either too much
overproduction
insulin.
of insulin.
Yeah, usually because we've given them too much insulin, or they've given themselves too much insulin, or whatever other medications they're on.
So hyperglycemia.
Yeah. So long-term hyperglycemia leads to damage to multiple organ systems, essentially. People with diabetes are up to 4 times more likely to have heart attacks and strokes.
Wow.
Yeah, and diabetes is the leading cause of preventable blindness in Australia.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, yep. Diabetic retinopathy.
Is that sorry, with the heart attacks and strokes, is that a relative risk increase or is that an absolute?
Ooh.
What's the difference?
Oh, because if it's an absolute increase, that if you've got a 10% chance of having a heart attack or whatever, and then you're absolutely 4 times more likely to have a heart attack. That means you've got a 40% chance of having a heart attack.
Right.
But that seems very high. So it would be a relative.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a relative risk.
So if it's a relative risk, then it's 14%, right? Am I right there?
I actually would have to look it up.
Never mind. It's not important.
I've never heard of that concept.
Oh, maybe I should talk about it next
relative
week.
risk and absolute risk is actually quite important. And it's something that pseudoscientific studies exploit a lot.
Yeah. Anyway, let's leave it for now. Might talk about it next week.
I want to know. So, kidney failure is 3 more times common in people with diabetes.
Wow.
Amputations are 15 times more common in people with diabetes. More than 30% of people with diabetes experience depression, anxiety, and distress. And early diagnosis, optimal treatment, and ongoing support and management reduce the risk of all these diabetic-related complications. So there's some pretty significant end organ damage that can be done, which has some pretty serious consequences. And the earlier you diagnose, the better we treat it, the less those risks are. So diabetic kidney disease is quite complex how it actually has its effect. But basically, high levels of blood glucose cause inflammation and fibrosis of the nephrons, which causes kidneys to be less effective at filtering the blood, and over time, they cause failure of the kidneys. Diabetics are also more likely to get bladder infections, which in repeated infections over time can possibly cause kidney damage as well or contribute to it.
So it kind of just sounds like it's just really bad for you in general.
Yeah. Yep.
Like it just affects all of your organs.
And this is all caused by like a high level of glucose in the blood. Like it's the glucose itself, or the acidosis or whatever it's called, that's doing the.
It
doing the
causes
damage?
small vessel disease, essentially, which is how it causes its retinopathy as well. So the damage in the eyes. there's pretty complex hormonal and immunological changes that contribute to it as well. It's multimodal and multifactorial in lots of different areas of the body. It also causes neuropathy, so damage to the nerves, which is a combination of metabolic and vascular factors that cause ongoing damage to the nerves. So it's very...
So name an organ of your body and it's bad for
pretty
it.
much, yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's pretty wild. It's a disease that I think most people would have heard of, or probably even know somebody that's got it. And most people roughly know that it's to do with sugar and insulin. But for a disease that's so relatively common,
Yeah.
it's super complicated.
Yeah, and the problem with things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they're just numbers when you get the diagnosis and when your doctor says you need to take this to reduce your blood sugar levels, or you need to take this to reduce your blood pressure, because you're not seeing the results of it. And it's pretty difficult to get someone to be motivated to change when you're saying, if we don't take care of your blood sugars, then in 15 years you might have kidney failure. Because they're like, yeah, that's 15 years away.
15 years, yeah.
Yeah. And
also,
the changes happen slowly.
You might have
might as well.
failure.
And the changes
but
happen
also
slowly.
you might have liver failure, but also you might have eye problems, but also you might have like circulatory problems. Like it's not it's not specific, and therefore, you know, if you could definitely say in 15 years you will have a heart attack and die, so fix your glucose levels, then that is a bit scarier. But basically it's just a general sort of like, well, it's not good for you.
Yeah.
But you're rolling the dice if you mismanage it, really, aren't you?
You are, yeah. So it's difficult to really for patients that maybe don't have the best health literacy, or even those that do. It's hard to really comprehend and stratify the risks of not having it well controlled. But it is something very important to start treating and start controlling well early, because the earlier you get onto treatment, the slower the damage will be, essentially.
Am I right in saying that it's a pretty large comorbidity as well? Like it's a contributor to a lot of different illnesses that may not be fatal on their own, but combine it with diabetes and it becomes a lot more likely, including things like COVID.
Yeah. So diabetics have been found to be more likely to have severe COVID, and that is than non-diabetics, and that is similar to most infections, really, with diabetes. There's an increased risk of infection overall with diabetics, and also it's more likely to lead to sepsis and becoming systemically very unwell. It's increased risk of osteomyelitis, which is infection of the bone.
Wow.
So there's a whole bunch of other risks that go along with it, along with the organ failure. There's an increased risk of celiac disease as well. And
really?
of skin damage and those sorts of things. So, yeah. And especially with celiac disease, it's especially type 1, but it is also type 2. Yeah.
Right, it just seems to involve itself in everything.
It does, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's effectively a disease of your blood, right? So,
yeah.
It's system wide. It's not just...
Well, it's a disease. It's not a disease of your blood, but it's a disease that's
no, but like it's a
systemically
disease
spread because of
yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. So how do we manage it? We've got a few different options. The first one that should always be tried before starting medications is lifestyle measures. Education programs, introduction to a diabetic educator, huge one, especially with type 2 diabetes early on. And most of what I'm talking about now relates to type 2 diabetes. Weight loss. Reduction in weight in early diabetes can actually reverse the changes that have occurred, and you can actually cure it, in air quotes, as I said before.
Wow.
And it's just something that so many patients and doctors aren't willing to try. Medical nutrition therapy, so dietitian involvement with education and a dietary plan tailored for diabetics. Regular exercise, not just for weight loss, but also independently improves blood glucose control. and increased responsiveness to insulin, so it delays the progression of the disease as well. Lifestyle measures are just so important, especially early in the course of the disease. You can actually reverse it. It slows the progression, slows the dependence on medications and insulin, and it also delays and reduces the severity of end organ effects. And it should always, a new diagnosis of diabetes should always have a trial period of a few months of just lifestyle measures if it's not severe.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's probably better that you fix it that way than to start a life of having to take insulin every day, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Insulin's usually quite late on in type 2 diabetes as well, because you've still got functioning insulin to start off with, but then either the production goes down or the body becomes resistant to the normal effects over time.
Yeah, right. Just goes down just because of overuse, I suppose.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. There's a few different classes of medications that we use. A big one that I'm sure anyone who's diabetic, if not is not on or would have it. Wow, that was a terrible sentence. There's a few different medications that we use for diabetes, a few different classes. The most common one, and I'm sure all diabetics, if not on it, have at least been trialled on it, is called metformin. So this reduces liver glucose production and increases the peripheral utilization of glucose. It's a pretty useful drug. It also assists in weight loss. It doesn't cause hypoglycemia, which is a risk with most of the medications. And it's also shown to independently improve cardiovascular outcomes. And it's quite a low cost, generally quite well tolerated. There's a class of drugs called the sulfonylureas. They essentially increase the pancreatic insulin secretion and can decrease insulin resistance. They can cause hypoglycemia, and they have been associated with weight gain as well. There's a class called the DPP-4 inhibitors, the dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitors. Through inhibition of DPP-4, they increase insulin secretion and reduce glucagon production. And then there's also the GLP-1 analogs. So they essentially increase glucose-dependent insulin secretion and reduce glucagon secretion. They also delay gastric emptying, so it slows down glucose absorption and decreases the appetite. So they're good for weight loss. And they're quite good for kidney and cardiovascular disease risk reduction. And then the last class of the main ones we use is the SGLT2 inhibitors. And they inhibit the transporter in the kidneys, so it reduces glucose reabsorption in the kidneys. So it increases glucose in the urine, so you're just peeing it out.
Right, okay.
And then a combination of those can be used depending on the patient and what they can tolerate. And then if their blood sugars are still not well regulated on those medications, then that's when we start looking at insulin. And there's long-acting forms, there's short-acting forms, there's ultra-short-acting forms, and then there's combinations of different insulins as well. And the regime we go on is different patient to patient. Most patients will have a long-acting insulin, which is called the basal, and that is something like glargine, which lasts 24 hours. And then we put them on a short-acting insulin as well, which is given around meal times to cope with that peak in blood glucose levels.
Oh, yeah.
But that varies patient to patient on how much you give and what type you give. And
yeah, that's actually really surprising. I just assumed that every diabetic was on insulin injections every day.
Most would not be, I reckon. I don't have a statistic on that, but I would think that most type 2 diabetics are not on insulin.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a run through of diabetes.
Huge. You weren't wrong when you said it was involved.
Yes. Yep. Pretty full on.
Yeah. No, that's massive.
Any questions or comments?
Not anymore.
No.
Have I just confused you more?
Not confused. No, educated.
Oh, good.
No. It's something that I knew almost nothing about. I think if you'd asked me before what causes diabetes, I would have said, too much sugar. Not enough insulin. But obviously it goes way further than that.
Yeah. Oh, and just to bring it all the way back to siphon excessive discharge of urine. Basically, one of the common presenting complaints of an undiagnosed diabetic is they're peeing more, and it's because of glucose being released in the urine, and then that just causes osmotic increase in volume of urine.
Right.
Hmm.
So the diabetics that need like a jelly bean, is that both type 1 and type 2 diabetics?
Not type 2, type 1 diabetics. So the reason that they need to have like an emergency store of some sort of sugar is because they're on insulin, and insulin levels are quite variable. The glucose levels are quite variable. If they're giving themselves an insulin dose regularly, but their glucose changes, they'll probably get symptoms of a hypo, or they might check their blood glucose level, and it might be low, so they'll give themselves a bit of sugar. Yeah, right. Okay. We do. Type 2 diabetics may also need it, but not very often.
So the hypoglycemia is caused by the administered insulin, not by the diabetes itself.
Yes. Yeah.
There you go.
I once was in a line waiting to enroll in university, and the guy in front of me sort of started swaying back and forward and all of a sudden collapsed onto me, and I kind of caught him, and in the process of figuring out what had happened, he told me that he was a diabetic and he hadn't eaten since early the evening before.
That wasn't a great idea.
But so he was obviously having a hypoglycemic episode.
Yeah, and then with the medications, so even with type 2, some of the medications can cause hypos. So around fasting for blood tests or surgery or those kind of things, we need to decide what they get and what they don't get. Yeah, so that's all a bit of a challenge as well.
Oh, well, good summary. That was super interesting and very in-depth.
Shouldn't have finished on the medications because that was probably the most eye-glazing bit. But that's okay.
Oh, that's all right.
Did you mention the medications?
I did. When you listen back to it, you'll find out.
Right. I wouldn't mind going through what might become hopefully a regular segment where we talk about various logical fallacies. Yeah, so I thought it'd be a cool idea to have a segment where we talk about logical fallacies because it's something that comes up so often, and most people probably don't really even realize what a logical fallacy is or how many there are. And I'm sure people use them. I'm sure I do as well. Use logical fallacies just subconsciously, without really even thinking that I'm doing it. But there are heaps.
Yeah, definitely.
And the one that I'm going to talk about today is the appeal to antiquity.
Yeah.
Right. Have you guys heard about this one?
Yeah.
Yes. Very common in ancient Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese medicine.
It's funny you should say that because I'm going to talk about that. So it's a type of appeal to authority. We'll probably talk more about that later on as well, but it's basically trusting something as true because an expert in a field said that something that's related to that field is true. So there's many reasons why this is not the case, and we'll definitely go into it one day, but just all you need to know is that the appeal to antiquity is a type of appeal to authority. So in this case, ancient wisdom is trusted, and the assumption is made that if something's been occurring for a very long time, then it must be valid, and a long time being hundreds or thousands of years usually. So I got the idea for this particular logical fallacy from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe book, Matt, that you got me for Christmas a couple of years ago. So this book references two things that we've actually spoken about on this very podcast that basically exist as an appeal to antiquity, and acupuncture is one and astrology is the other. There's heaps, but these are the two that are listed in this particular chapter. So firstly, something I found interesting was that acupuncture isn't even that old.
No.
This is just a bit of a sidebar. Like modern acupuncture it's only been around for about a century.
I mean, traditional Chinese medicine has only been around for about that time as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I mean, but
Crazy.
But prior to this, acupuncture was more of a form of bloodletting. It was very superstitious, and the acupuncture points were aligned on the body to Chinese astrology because of the beliefs that our bodies were aligned with heavens. But today, it's marketed as an ancient Chinese medicine that's been around for thousands of years. And that's often the reason, I think, that folks trust it. And astrology is the other one that it references. And astrology dates back to a time before we understood the universe. Or really even what stars actually were. You know, like it comes from a time before modern science existed. But...
And that's what makes it right, Levi.
Well, yeah. But the argument that people often use with astrology and acupuncture and a lot of other pseudosciences that exist because of an appeal to antiquity is it's been around forever. Civilizations were using this thousands of years ago. Or something like it's been perfected over thousands of years. It must work. And
On the side, just quickly, have
Yeah.
you looked into bloodletting before? That's crazy.
Yeah, not real in depth, but I have. Yeah, it is pretty crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
gross.
we should cover it at some point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easiest to talk about medicine here because that's probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Is Chinese medicine. But as you've said, Sam, it's actually not even that old.
Yeah.
At all. But
Sorry, do you know why they, like, essentially what caused the boom of traditional Chinese medicine?
no, I don't.
I'm pretty sure it's because the Chinese government couldn't afford to give modern medicine to their full population. So they started marketing things like acupuncture and herbal remedies as traditional medicine and started rolling it out as that to their population first. And that's how it kind of started and grew.
Really?
Mm.
Yeah, right. Well, that's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Marketing, eh?
Mm.
But yeah, there was one that I actually came face to face with recently, an appeal to antiquity. And it was at a winery. I think I was telling you about it, Sam, but it was a winery
Oh, yeah.
that I visited recently. I won't say the name of it, but whilst we were there, we tried some really good wine, and there was one wine in particular that we tried, and the lady that was filling our glasses was telling us a story about how it's biodynamically certified, and it was planted and watered with energized water on the moon cycles, and we know that this is right because like pagans have been planting to moon cycles for thousands of years, so we're using that kind of ancient knowledge. So
I mean,
yeah,
moon cycles, that sounds a bit sus, but like we have been planting to the seasons for a long time.
Oh, definitely.
And that's
no, there's a lot of good things that the pagans did do, planting to seasons and solstices and equinoxes and that kind of thing. But I don't think watering a plant on a certain moon cycle would have any effect on the plant's uptake of that water. And I know that we say that the moon can change tides, but that's on such a large scale, and it's only changing the tide by a couple of meters. So when you consider that we're watering with say even if it's 10 liters per plant. Anyway, this is just a massive digression, and we're not really talking about moon cycles, but we should one day. But the point was that it was this appeal to antiquity, logical fallacy that came up in regard to the pagans, and the reason that it was being done is because it was this ancient wisdom, and they've been doing it for thousands of years, and so that's why we do it. It must be right, but this doesn't mean that it's right. Like, society can only gain knowledge, if you know what I mean. Now that we are where we are, we can really use knowledge, particularly these days with how heavily documented everything is. And even medical practices that we thought sort of 60 years ago were great, we've now learned are dangerous. Like, think about something like thalidomide. We don't do something that we did years ago just because it was done years ago. We learn more about it now. And new knowledge, I think, is always best. And we can always improve on our knowledge on the world with new findings. And I'll just say that obviously there may be ancient civilizations that were able to do amazing, incredible things that they discovered how to do, like navigation, cropping, medicine, building the pyramids.
Building pyramids. Yeah. That's always a standard one.
And these are amazing, but they didn't really understand how anything worked. They just knew or thought that it did work, and so they did it.
I mean, they understood, basic physics in that getting big blocks up a hill is easier if you build ramps and put them on rollers. Like, it's not, that's physics, but it's not. So they did understand the basics of what they were doing.
Of
but
how it works.
if you're talking about, like, how the solar system influences, that's just pure guesswork.
Yeah, but that's right. But my point that I'm getting to is that whilst they may have had knowledge about how something works, they didn't really know why it works. And we're always able to build on that knowledge, which is why, because you're building on knowledge and you're getting new sources of information, just by that fact alone, surely new knowledge is better than old knowledge, wouldn't you say? What I mean is, like, now we know how these things work, which means that we can improve our practices so much.
Yeah.
Like, I would say that sound scientific knowledge trumps ancient wisdom every time.
Yeah. There probably aren't too many wineries that are planting their or watering by moon cycles these days.
Probably not.
I would just urge caution as well on saying that new knowledge is best, because there is actually the appeal to novelty as well, which is just because something is new doesn't necessarily mean it's better. But I see what your point is about new scientific knowledge is actually an accumulation of all of the previous scientific knowledge that's been built on. So
yeah, that's what I mean when I say that society we gain knowledge. So everything that we know now, yesterday we knew a little bit less about it, and the day before that we knew a little bit less about it, metaphorically speaking. So
yeah, I just don't want people to go away thinking like, well, if it's new, it's better.
Oh no, yeah, I may have minced my words there, but no, that's certainly not what I meant. I just meant that sound scientific knowledge. I'm not talking about brand new discoveries that are totally out of left field. I'm sort of talking about things that we've built up a knowledge base upon over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and now, hopefully, they're better than ever. Do you have a cool side story, bro?
All right, here's my cool side story. Have you heard the claim that emergency departments get more crazy when there's a full moon?
Yes.
Super common belief. I won't bore you with the details. The answer is they do not. They do not get more crazy when there's a full moon.
Really? There's
a huge amount of data.
That's so surprising.
I looked up a heap of studies. There was one study I found that showed it was a weird study design as well. They looked at specifically at cases and when they occurred rather than like presentations over a period of time. It was very strange. There was one study that showed an increase.
Wait, so can you explain that in a different way? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
So most of the studies I looked at to see if there was a real correlation showed no correlation between moon cycles in general, but full moon and emergency presentations, or full moon and psychiatric presentations, or full moon and violence, or all those kind of presentations. There was one study, and most of those studies, there was one in particular that was like 500,000 ED presentations or something.
Whoa.
So there was huge studies. And there was one that was like 91 cases in one ED in one town that showed that like 60 out of them occurred during full moon periods or something. Something like that. But it was just a weird study design, that one. And I mean, even just comparing it to the volume of data that shows there's no correlation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you almost expect statistical anomalies like
Well,
that
that's
to
right. That's
happen.
the p-value, right? 95% of
Yeah.
the time we would expect it not to be chance. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so essentially there is no correlation between full moon and craziness in EDs. It's probably just a very good example of confirmation bias by people that work
Yeah.
there.
Well, then if that's true, Sam, why do they call them lunatics?
You know what? Let's look up the etymology of that.
It's because the full moon.
How can you
makes
have
people
your
crazy.
best joke and your worst joke in the one
Oh,
episode?
shit. You know what, Levi? The term lunatic derives from the Latin word lunaticus, which originally referred mainly to epilepsy and madness as diseases thought to be caused by the moon.
Yeah, well,
No way. Oh, okay. It's not even a
No.
joke. It's a legit
yeah.
thing.
They don't call me live
Oh,
live
I
the
thought you
lunatic
were
for
kidding.
nothing.
That's pretty funny.
Wow.
No, of course.
Okay, well, I take it back.
But yes, there is no correlation. From what
Right.
from an overarching view of the studies, there was no correlation.
And it's data collected from heaps of different countries too.
Yeah.
Over a huge, really long period of time.
Yeah.
Well, 500,000.
That was just one study.
Mm.
And yeah, well, an N of 500,000 is massive.
Yeah.
Yep. So there is no correlation between the full moon and emergency department presentations.
Right.
Good.
Well, is it a full moon now? Because like that could explain my particular snarkiness this episode.
I don't know.
I don't think it is. I've heard.
Maybe Mercury's in retrograde again.
Oh no. I've heard this not just in relation to hospitals, but also in relation to schools. Like I've heard certain teachers that I know say that the kids were really ratty today. It must be because there's a full moon, and I'm guessing you could also apply this hospital ED admission logic to school kid behaviour as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look that up specifically, but I think that would be a fair assumption.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you might as well be like, oh, the kids were really bad today. It's because it's the third Friday of the third month of the year.
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, there's definitely confounding variables. If you've got a one particular day where the kids are bad, you're either confirming your own bias or there's other confounding factors.
Yeah, I mean, by what mode of action would the moon be affecting people's behaviours?
Well, that's what it comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the mode of action. It's the same with like last week you were talking about the weather affecting arthritis.
Yeah, in which case there is a plausible method of action.
Yeah, but my immediate reaction was incredulous because I couldn't imagine what the mode of action would be until Levi mentioned barometric pressure, and then I went, "Oh yeah, okay, that's actually plausible." But I mean, I don't think anybody's been able to suggest a plausible mode of action for the moon affecting.
No, I don't think so.
I can't think of one.
Yeah,
But,
apart from an appeal to authority. An appeal to antiquity.
Yes, exactly.
It all ties together.
Well, in the interest of our poor editor who's got to sift through this waffle, I'm going to jump straight into the recommendations this week. And it's a bit of a bittersweet one, particularly, and I hate to bring up COVID, but particularly because of COVID, because we can't really travel across Australia to where most of us would like to go. But my recommendation, when everything does open back up again, is everyone should get down and check out Hobart, the capital city of Tasmania.
Nice.
Because
that is definitely on my shortlist.
Because it's beautiful. It's by far the most beautiful capital city in Australia that I've been to. Just its surroundings. Like Hobart City itself is amazing. There's the historic Battery Point. There's the Salamanca markets, which is just awesome. It's the home to Aurora Australis. Well, it was before it retired. Australia's Antarctic Research Vessel. So that was pretty cool. But there's also just...
Oh, I thought you meant the
Aurora Borealis.
Oh, the
No,
Aurora
I
Australis.
thought you meant the actual atmospheric phenomenon.
Well, you probably could see it from Tassie.
I was like, yeah, it lives in Hobart.
You definitely could see it from Tassie. But there's also a really great food, beer, and Scotch and gin scene there. There's Mount Wellington, which is the mountain in the background, which is just beautiful. It gets capped with snow during the winter. There's a really cool museum that I went to. There's got a great Antarctic exhibit. Like I said, it's really just the most beautiful capital city. It's down the bottom of the hill. It's on a harbour. It's just surrounded by rolling hills and water, and it's really fantastic. And it's just a stone's throw from the gorgeous Huon Valley and Mount Field National Park and Bruny Island. And yeah, everyone should get down and check out Hobart. I've had a lot of good times there.
Nice.
So for the third of our listeners that are American, Tasmania is the little island at the bottom of Australia that it's not actually connected by land.
Yeah.
Or by a land bridge to the mainland of Australia, but it's still part of Australia.
It's like Hawaii, but cold.
It's not New Zealand. That's Tasmania, and it's a state of Australia.
Yeah, you've got to cross the Bass Strait, which is the Strait of Water, in one way or another.
It's a gnarly piece of water as well.
It's supposed to be, a notoriously bad patch of sea to sail across, and one of the most popular methods of getting from mainland Australia to Tasmania is by the Spirit of Tassie, which is a big giant ferry. And I've been on it twice, there and back again, and had a pretty good crossing, but I've heard absolutely atrocious stories of really shocking crossings.
Much like the Bermuda Triangle, which we should talk about.
Yeah, we should talk about that. Yeah. Anyway, that's my recommendation.
What do you got, Matt?
You go first.
All right. Mine is a YouTube video, which is a live set from band Rufus du Sol, live from Joshua Tree. It's essentially a set that they recorded out in Joshua Tree at sunset. So it's like a really amazing view and just very cool music, very atmospheric. Love it.
Nice.
Yeah, really cool. 45-minute set. Really cool.
I listened to some of the podcasts that you recommended to us, Sam.
Oh, yeah? What'd you think?
No Stupid Questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah.
One of the most amazing parts of the podcast was right at the end, once I think it's the editor or the
fact
producer,
check,
whoever it is. It's a lady.
Yeah.
She gets her hands on it. Yeah, she does the fact check. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, she throws in some cool stuff.
Yeah, which is really great.
Yeah, that is I also listened to it, and that is a really good concept that we should probably think about implementing for ourselves.
Yeah.
Although that does seem like a lot of work for the poor editor.
Yes. It does.
But that's your job.
Your job is to fix all of our
Anyway,
mistakes.
So my recommendation this week is a blog.
Ooh.
It's written by a bunch of authors, but
Can I guess it?
it was founded...
Can I guess it? Neurologica?
Yes. No,
Science-based medicine?
No, close though. Science-based medicine,
nice.
yeah. It's called Science-Based Medicine. Sciencebasedmedicine.org. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Founded by the great Stephen Novella, who is the founder of Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast, and it has other notable skeptical authors like Harriet Hall and David Gorski, and really interesting. They talk about all things skepticism, and it's not just about medicine, but it's predominantly about it, and just a super interesting, really easily digestible read on a bi-daily basis.
Yeah, it's great. And there's a huge backlog of stuff in there. It's like 10 years or so worth of stuff. And it's, what is it,
I
daily
may be giving
articles?
away a bunch of my research secrets for Idio Facto, but most of my preliminary searching comes from science-based medicine. So check it out.
I think they have daily updates on there, and I go on there most days and read whatever's on there. It's very interesting. Great website.
That's it for this episode of Idio Facto. Forward all suggestions, hate mail, evidence, and arguments to idiofacto@gmail.com.
And you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, and all other social platforms at Idio Facto.
If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share us with a friend. Links are in the show notes.
I always feel pretty shagged after I've been drinking a lot and I wake up, and part of it obviously is because I've been drinking a lot of alcohol, but also I think a lot
Levi,
of
I
it...
don't want to know about your sex life.
Just get your mind out of there.
Well, you did say shag.
Yeah. Well. All right. Well, I can't say because we're not allowed to say that on this show.
Well, you can. I'm just going to bleep it
A
out.
really loud bleep too.
So I'm not allowed to say or
Again, you can say it all. I'm just going to bleep it all
Just
out.
gonna fucking bleep it out.
Well, don't bleep out.
No, bleep it out. That'd be funnier.
People will be like, "What is he saying?"
If you bleep it out, that'd be funny.
Oh, come on.
Stop it.
Let's move the
What were you halfway through something, Levi?
Oh, was I? I don't know. I got interrupted.
I don't know.
I was waiting for you to talk about diabetes.
Oh, okay.
All I was saying was that I have a sleep when I've been drinking.
Shag.
Yeah, I
we
said
heard
that.
you.
Yeah.
Me. All right, last one.